I feel no one is as emotionally involved in films like the lovers of Bollywood are. I can see that, yeah. So for decades, it has contributed directly or indirectly to important aspects of our lives, as we know. You know, right from hairstyles to clothes to, what is right and wrong, moral dilemmas. Like you go back to DDLJ, Shah Rukh Khan's, हर चीज़ के दो रास्ते होते हैं, सही and गलत. And I have been there as a starry-eyed teenager, and Nasreen and Sunny, of course, must have been there, and they have their own stories, which I think they're going to share very soon. And when I was a young student, a school student, I was obsessed with cinema. When you say you just like cinema, it's an understatement, being an Indian or South Asian, but I was obsessed with cinema and I always wanted to write about cinema. But there is one particular incident which happened, what made me realize that I have to write a story, and I was not even a fan of that actor. My first book was on Rajesh Khanna, and growing up, my childhood was all about Amitabh Bachchan, and Rajesh Khanna for me was has been. We used to laugh at his films. He's melodramatic, he overacts and whatever. But that day, 19 July 2012, I was in Bombay, and when he passed away, and it was his funeral procession. I was asked to make a documentary for my channel I was working for, and I became a part of his funeral procession. And it was that day, and started raining in Mumbai that morning. And even then, there were thousands and thousands of people who came to say their goodbye to Rajesh Khanna. And I met so many ladies there were one from Kolkata, I remember, I have written about her in the book. And she looked at me and she said, "You are so young, you will not understand what he meant for us." And when we used to go and watch Rajesh Khanna's film, it used to be a date between him and me. There was one person from Punjab who lives in Canada, and Chhabra Saab, he told me that, in 70s I was struggling, a young man, and his movies and his style and his adaएं used to be a balm on my struggle. And such melodramatic and mushy things, which I said, what is happening here? So what charm did that man possess? That was the first thing that made me curious. And more importantly, what transpired in the journey of being this phenomena and becoming a nobody, an untouchable, almost untouchable during the last 20 years of his life. Now that was the story I wanted to tell, and despite not being a fan, it has been one of my most favorite journey, and it is a complete Bollywood story, and I wanted to share this with you. Now, my first question to both of you, Sunny, first you, because of this book, A Bollywood State of Mind. I recently read the book, and I love the funny and the personal anecdotes in it. What does Bollywood mean to you? The question is also for Nasreen, but it's your book, and it's called Bollywood State of Mind.
It is called Bollywood State of Mind, and thank you. I'm very honored to be here. I have to say I have referenced Nasreen's work for 20 years.
All of us have.
She shows up in my PhD thesis, so it's a real, true honor to be here. In the past few months, I have always started with a short statement. I will not take very long, but I will beg some indulgence. So before we begin, I want to take a few moments to acknowledge the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Since October 2023, Israel has dropped more than 70,000 tons of bombs, which far surpass the bombing of Dresden, Hamburg, and London combined during all of the Second World War. It has also killed over 50,000 people in Gaza. Over 100,000 have been injured. Majority of those killed are women and children. Over 25,000 children have lost one or more parent, or both parents. Gaza now has the largest number of child amputees in the world. The people of Gaza are being killed and mutilated, not only by the world's most sophisticated weapons, but also in forced starvation, illness, and disease, resulting from the destruction of most of the infrastructure and a comprehensive blockade. In the past 8 months, nearly all infrastructure has been destroyed or damaged, including housing, roads, hospitals, schools, and universities, and each and every essential aspect of human living. Each death is not only a devastating loss of life, memory, and history, but it is also foreclosing of futures of individuals and an entire people, of the possibilities of stories, of ideas, and imagination. These are innumerable, but today I will name only one: poet, teacher, scholar, and colleague, and a very big Bollywood fan, Rafat Laharair. Rafat and I had spoken while I was working on this book, A Bollywood State of Mind, about a future project, a volume on the international political impact of Indian cinema. He wanted to write about the influence of Bollywood on the first Intifada. He was a big Amitabh fan. An idea that had not yet been written or even explored, and now he never will. I cannot emphasize enough how urgently we need a permanent ceasefire and a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace. So thank you for bearing with me. Ooh. And now to...
Thank you for using your platform.
Thank you. And now to your question,
Yeah.
Yasser. Bollywood is life. You said, what does it mean to me? My first memories are of listening to Mughal-e-Azam. We had the LP. So I watched Mughal-e-Azam when I was about 12. But I heard Mughal-e-Azam for the first 12 years of my life. I knew all the dialogues. I knew all the songs. I had seen these photographs. So I had imagined how this worked. I had imagined the entire story in my head. And it was nice to actually watch Mughal-e-Azam and not be disappointed, because it was better than I had imagined. But for me, the movie that matters most is Parvarish. And that's a 1977 movie. It's also a Manmohan Desai movie, so now I'm showing my real Bollywood masala credential here. And I was a kid, I was about 8, and we went to see it. And of course, we were in a small town, UP in Banaras, and it's a big production to go see. So all of us went. There were 5 rickshaws. My uncles were on motorcycles. They were doing like this round back and forth, surrounding the rickshaws. And then we all sat in this hall. And I had seen movies before, but something special happened that moment. I watched something that was magic, and as Yasser said, that was the start of an obsession. I came out and I wanted to know how that worked, how this magic was created. And in many ways, so I spent all my old notebooks, school notebooks, we didn't get to throw them away. We used to have them as our rough copies, right? So we kept them, we hung on to them. So I used all my old school notebooks to do what now I realize were storyboards. So I would make these scenes and say, what would happen if you mix them up? What happens if you change it? I was completely obsessed. So I think for me, in addition to life, my career as a writer, as a creative, as a storyteller begins with Parvarish, because that's when I said, I need to know how to do this.
What Mughal-e-Azam did for you, I think Shole's audio tapes did for me. It used to be such a staple thing in every household. Nasreen, we have read all your books. I have read all your books and inspired by them. Go back to them whenever I start writing. But, the entire journey of writing 22 books, where did that obsession came from?
I think the obsession, like everyone here, has got a story to tell about either a film or a star they got connected to.
Yeah.
But for me, it was mainly the songs. I was connected to the songs. I thought they were the most original part of Indian cinema. They were, you could say, repeat the same stories again and again, as we know, but you cannot repeat the same song. The audience would not accept it. Plus, I think the fact that we had playback singers who could really sing made a big difference, rather than an actor who kind of stumbles through. So all that made a difference. But I think the the moment that I thought, when I was about 11 or 12 or something like that I thought, yeah, cinema is what I want to work at. Not just Indian cinema, but cinema in general, is when I went to see Mehboob Khan's Aan. I think it was one of the first films I'd seen, and there was a wonderful scene in there in which Mimi is riding a horse and she's singing Lata's song, Aaj mere man mein sakhi bansuri bajaye koi. And she's riding, and she's not riding like this, which she should. She's riding like this. Anyway, she's riding through these wonderful fields of mustard fields. And at the very end, there's a black horse, and a wonderful man is sitting on it. And it was Dilip Kumar. So very frankly, I think all my work started on that black horse.
You are not telling us the real thing. It was actually a star. It was Dilip Kumar.
It was Dilip Kumar, but he was not just a star. In my course of my work, in my course of my work, I've met lots of stars. And the only one I got excited to meet when I was about 15 years old, we had gone to Hyderabad and we had booked into a hotel, Ritz Hotel, and there's a balcony, and I was looking over the balcony. Who do I see check in? Dilip Kumar. I couldn't believe it. So then he was checking in, being very polite. He had a soft voice. He spoke gently, and he was, I'd say, his sophistication personified, that man.
And she's saying it wasn't a star.
Yeah.
It wasn't,
Come
it wasn't his stardom, it was his persona. It wasn't about being famous.
I understand.
So basically, when he saw me up there, he waved, and then he said, come down. And there were stairs, and I think I flew down those stairs. I did not walk down those stairs. And then anyway, he said, where are you from? I said, well, I live in London. He said, oh, I see. Why didn't you come and have tea with me this afternoon? And that to me was the treasure moment in all my life. It was so wonderful, and he is so gracious. And the best thing about him, in terms of his work and his cinema, is he understood dialogue delivery to the camera. Up to that point, people were very melodramatic, they were very loud, they were not aware of the technique as well as the character. And he lowered the whole tone, and he almost whispered, so that you paid total attention to this man when he spoke. And Mr. Bachchan does it more theatrically and brilliantly, also dialogue delivery. But Yusuf Saab had a way of speaking, was very soft. And when he would speak very softly, everyone would listen. When you shout, nobody listens.
We really changed the medium, as we know. And also, while we are talking about our own obsessions and our own inspirations in cinema, I think being in India and watching a movie, it's a different kind of cinematic tradition or viewing tradition. I'll tell you why. Because for 20 years I was working as a journalist, a TV journalist, and I was reviewing cinema, I was interviewing film stars, and I was watching the proverbial first day first show, which is a big thing in India still. And I moved to London some time ago, and I went to watch Pathaan, which was supposed to be this big comeback for Shah Rukh Khan, which, thinking about it, imagining it, okay, this is going to be the ultimate comeback, and watching it in a London theatre was a little underwhelming. There were no claps, no whistles, no hoots. I almost said, what's really happening? And it was actually a full house, but no one was talking to, people were not talking, not discussing, not clapping, not laughing. That day I really realized that tradition is particularly Indian or South Asian, if we call it, and that is missing completely. Now coming back to the good news of last month, I'm not talking about the election results, but the cinematic good news. Payal Kapadia's big win at Cannes, and here we are talking about Bollywood, and we are very proud of Payal Kapadia and her win, and she made history at Cannes. At the same time, I know, and I think you will agree to that not many people who love Bollywood are going to watch that film. Because that is not the Bollywood we are discussing sitting over here today. I would like to ask you, what is the gap? Because we as audiences, as viewers, we want our Pathaan, Jawan, RRR, yet we want the recognition that Payal Kapadia has got through her very special film. where's that gap vis-a-vis world cinema?
Oh, so now it's yeah, I love the fact you passed it to me. Thanks.
I'll add to.
So here's the thing. I think Payal Kapadia's win is very important. I think that is really something we should start with. But I want to ask, why does it matter what France or Italy or Hollywood or whatever, why does it matter? Already in 2006, National Geographic had an article that said that Bollywood, in that big term, reached 1 billion more people across the world than Hollywood does. That figure has grown, it's not shrunk. So this idea that somehow we should be acknowledged by, frankly, former colonizers makes no sense to me. Really, it truly makes no sense to me. I also think Cannes is specifically a weird beast. So we talk about these, okay, so there are people who go, I mean, now there's a big thing with the stars, Bollywood stars doing, and they're there in kind of a promotional capacity. But why have people like Gulzar, Javed Akhtar, all of the stars and actors, movie makers, how come they've never been invited to be on the juries? So what cinema are we talking about? So that's the first thing. I also want to say something else, which is I am tired of this idea of independent cinema, especially in Europe, which is funded by their governments. It's state cinema, call it state cinema, that's it. It's not as if every cinema's film proposal gets approved by Germany or British or French filmmakers. So there's much to be said about the independence of commercial filmmaking with all the risks that it entails. And we should actually take pride in it rather than looking at what the festivals want to say or not say about our movies.
Nasreen, do you agree with her? Because right before this session,
Yes.
we were talking and Nasreen said a very interesting thing. It was a great insight. She said everyone knows Shah Rukh Khan. Of course, Shah Rukh Khan is Shah Rukh Khan, the biggest superstar in the world. But they know Shah Rukh Khan through his image, not through his work. So not many people have watched all his films. That's what you were saying, Nasreen.
Yes, I agree and don't agree with you. I think that what Khan does is recognizes that filmmakers have an individual voice as creative artists, and just as much as you are recognized by your peer group, which is beyond race and beyond class and beyond everything, is a great feeling. Because for Payal to be recognized like this by other filmmakers, like they've recognized Irani films, Korean films, it's not just white films, and they don't really promote the Marvel movies. They don't get these action movies and Arnie Schwarzenegger and so on. They are for a certain type of thinking cinema. And if Indian cinema appeals to them, and Mr. Ray did, Ritik Ghatak did, some of Shyam Benegal did, there is no harm in it because you are competing with world cinema, and you have to compete with world cinema in as much as you are part of the world. So you can't be making your little films somewhere else. The popular cinema everywhere in the world appeals first to its own audience. Like the Hollywood movies, like the Hindi cinema. I avoid the term Bollywood and always have, and will continue to, because to me that's much more patronizing than Cannes Film Festival. So basically, the actual country likes its popular cinema. I say, why did Payal's film appeal? I think it is Europeans and people who like a certain type of cinema like a very restrained performance. And our actors, bless them all, they are not that restrained. That is not their medium. If they're too restrained, they'll be rejected. In India, they'll be the first be rejected. Ye kya kar rahe hain? So therefore, this restrained, who is restrained? The Korean cinema, the Irani cinema, and Payal's films, Mr. Ray's films, and so on. So you should see on what criterion do they choose films. And if you say to somebody, look, I'm going to enter my paratha factory or enter my paratha production in a place that is making pizzas, you're talking potatoes and tomatoes. They're not going to match. So you have to understand, I feel, that cinema has many forms and it should be recognized in many ways.
True, true. But like you talked about cinema being popular locally, like Indian cinema is popular within India or South Asia. But when we talk about Hollywood, they get the widest audience across the globe. I'm talking about their popular films.
But
what
how
is the
many a
difference?
year?
So
How
I think
many a year?
I want to pick up
How
on
many a
something a
year?
little bit more. So first of all, both Hollywood and Indian cinema, I agree. It's quite strange because my book is called Bollywood because it was the easiest shorthand for people to pick up. But actually, when I'm in India or anywhere in the global south, whether it's Latin America, Asia, Africa, I never have to use the word Bollywood. The only time I ever use it is when I'm in the States or in Europe. Because this is where in the global north they need a shorthand. Everywhere else they talk about specific movies, they talk about cinema from India, they talk about they talk about stars. So I think one of the things we need to, when we talk about Hollywood's reach, we should be thinking about vertical integration, which basically is a product of economic and political might, primarily economic might. So the studios from the top companies that create films also have access and ownership in different ways of the cinema halls. Let's think about what that means. There is nothing that says a movie has to be an hour and a half long. Very clearly, let's be very clear. This is a standard that has been imposed by this business project called vertical integration because it speeds up the number of people you can fit into a multiplex or a small theater. That's all it is. You create a great movie, people will watch it.
I must add to that because Hitchcock apparently said 90 minutes is when you need to go to the toilet.
I think Raj Kapoor also said something. He said, my films cannot be divided into two parts, pre-interval and post-interval. Interval is just meant so that you can go and piss.
Yes.
So
And then
that's the
I
only
think-
use of...
And samosas, the samosas are important.
And Coppola also said that a film should be as long as it's interesting. So you
Yeah.
have Godfather, the 3 hours.
But yeah, what she's saying also, Nasreen, that we are proud of our cinematic traditions and narrative structures. So what if they are over the top? And once in a while, like what RRR did last year at the Oscar and Golden Globe, everyone was going gaga over our songs and dance traditions and everything. But at the same time, such films are rare, and I am amazed that they don't become the norm at international festivals.
Because
what was so special in RRR that Jawan should have also got an award like that. If
Yes.
they're the same films. They're following the masala traditions that we love so much.
Well, let's think two things. One is that it's not a question of pride or non-pride. I wouldn't have spent 40 years of my life working on a cinema if I didn't believe in it unapologetically. That's aside. Second part, why Jawan doesn't do as well for the non-white. As once I asked a friend, there's a wider audience for Hindi cinema. He said, you mean a whiter audience? So basically, what are we after? A whiter audience or a wider audience? Because there's all of Africa who loves Hindi films. I went to Dakar once in the 80s. 19 out of 22 cinemas, Yasser were playing Amitabh Bachchan.
Yeah.
19, and he was like a god there. So basically, what's the difference? You have to say, this RRR imagined cinema in the way nobody had imagined it anywhere in the world. I'm not making a judgment. I'm making the fact of approach to cinematic traditions. The camera, the editing, the structure of the film was totally different. What really appealed was the dance. That
Natu thing.
So it's the dance. I saw it as like, do you remember there was a Korean dance, gangster, what was it called?
Gangnam Style.
Yeah, that one had a worldwide appeal. So to me, Natu followed that tradition more than cinema tradition. It became in itself an hugely entertaining moment, which was expanded by the net.
Such a valid point, Nasreen. Yeah. So like we've discussed now, commercial versus
But I also want to
art
pick up
cinema,
on
yeah.
something. I just want to pick up on something. It's the idea of what Nasreen said. When we think global audiences, what is going unsaid is not a wider audience, but a whiter audience.
Yeah.
Part of the book is actually traces all the strange places I have encountered, what I consider my cinema. So, including the most remote places, some of the places you can kind of understand, much of Africa, much of West Asia, these are places where just being from India, the first question is Hindi hai, the second question is, depending on the age of the person, either Amitabh Bachchan or Shah Rukh Khan. In Cairo, I've had somebody ask me about Shatrughan Sinha, which was very funny. But it's done things that, for me, what's been really amazing is that it opens doors. So I have spent 3 hours, 4 hours, an afternoon with my fixer on the Hijaz Railway in the middle of Wadi Rum in the desert, playing Sholay and the Viru Jai scene. So, and playing on this abandoned railroad. But I've also ended up in places that you have almost no access to. In homes, in religious institutions, in all kinds of places. But I've also met people in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the remote mountains in Mexico. I've had a conversation with a very old woman who barely spoke Spanish and spoke indigenous language, who wanted to talk about Mother India. She had been to Mexico City twice and she had seen Mother India. And that was what she wanted. She wanted to know if we had more movies like that. So we should be thinking about where we reach. There's an enormous amount of Chinese cinema that constantly references us. It constantly references particular movies, scenes, so on. We seem to ignore it. Egyptian cinema does the same thing. So there is, in our own heads, this kind of an internalized colonial lens, which says, unless we are accepted in Europe and North America by the white people, our movies aren't good enough. And that is our problem, not the movies' problem.
I can only say बड़े-बड़े देशों में ऐसी छोटी-छोटी बातें होती ही रहती हैं. So now coming to a subject which is very close to my heart and all of us, which is writing on cinema industry, in the documentation. We are different kind of writers in terms of the cinema books we have written. This is a memoir, a very personal take on Indian cinema or Hindi cinema. I go the old documentation way, interviewing film stars and interviewing people close to him personally and professionally, him or her. But you have devised a very nice format which we all love, which is the in conversation books. You have done many with Javed Saab, Javed Akhtar, you have done with Gulzar, you have done with A.R. Rahman, blockbuster books. So a very important question which everyone has in their mind. The question is, how is it different from a normal interview a film star or a filmmaker is giving to a newspaper or a TV channel? You have created entire books out of those conversations. How are those two conversations different from each other?
Basically, an interview for me and on a conversation, for one, the conversation doesn't happen over one time. Like with Lata ji, it was over 2 years. With Rahman, it was over 3 years. With Javed Saab, some was 1, some was 3. Gulzar Saab was a full year because he's very disciplined and gives you strict timing. Come at 11 o'clock and you have your Nimbu Pani at 10 past 11 and we start working. So it was very clear and easy to work with him. And Zakir was the same thing, very structured. The conversation is not about what are you shooting next week, what are you doing next week. It is not about the here and now, it is about the overview. And when you do an overview, you can ask them questions which actually trace a timeline in their life work. So that way you could say that these same people are very, very busy or unable or uninterested in writing an autobiography. Lata ji wrote something in Marathi, but that was quite short. I don't see Zakir Saab having his time, and Rahman, I doubt autobiography. So this form means you preserve their voice. You are not putting words in their mouth, they are speaking, and yet you get as much information as possible out. The thing that you really have to figure out, really, Yasser, is that if you ask them naive questions or questions that are about basic research, they are not going to open up. You have to give them time to open up, and you have to have a very good understanding of their work.
You know, reading Nasreen's book, I always feel that she knows more about Javed Akhtar's life than Javed Sahab himself. That's the kind of preparation that comes across in those questions.
I have to say there is something really, so a lot of my work is around thinking about how filmmakers imagine the movies they make. And your work has been so important because I constantly quoted your work in my thesis, my PhD thesis, in all the work I do, because it's exactly that. You've got some of the most amazing contributors to film talking about their ideas about cinema, and that is so absolutely priceless, truly.
Because it's not really me, it's the fact that people love, artists love to talk about the why, how, and when. They like those simple questions. If you go there with very convoluted academic questions, they get intimidated or bored.
What's your favorite story among so you have to, even if you don't want to take names?
There was one, it is not an anecdote during the making, but it was an anecdote at the launch of the Lataji book. I thought that was an amazing thing that happened. Everybody was asking Lataji all the questions. Then suddenly there was, I cannot name the actress who was sitting on the front row. She said, Nasreen, I want to ask you a question, because most of the conversation took place over the telephone. Lataji was in Bombay and I was in London, so we talked over the phone and I wrote down the answers. So this lady asked me, wasn't it a big disadvantage not to see Lataji and talk over the phone? How did you know her emotions? So Lataji pulled the mic from my hand and she said, "मैं तो playback singer हूँ." I'm a playback singer. So for 55 years she's been emoting without being seen. So she thought it was a crazy question, and everybody, like you all, burst out laughing. And in her sweet, soft voice, she put the actress in her place.
That's a lovely story.
Yes.
Sunny, you wrote a book on Amitabh Bachchan also for BFI, and you received a letter from him. What's the story?
So I'm fascinated by superstars. So a lot of my work is on stardom and stars. And I'm fascinated by how they present themselves to the world and how they create, in some ways, their own stories and their own mythology. And there is nobody who's done it better than Amitabh Bachchan. So luckily, there's so much work on him, so I was quite happy. I had loads of archival work. And I wrote, it was for BFI, it was meant to be critical, so it was critical. I sent it off to him, the finished copy. And then two things happened, which I thought was really funny. First, a friend of mine, I was in Paris for a conference, and I walked into the conference, and the speaker, who was my friend, came and she was doing that Amitabh step, And I was like, what happened? And she said, he's blogged about your book. And I was like, really? So I was really excited, and obviously then the messages started arriving, and he'd blogged on his book, and it was, for me, was interesting, which was a very kind of chalta phirta, humko English nahi aati, I don't know English very well. It's very kind of, hitting the kind of mass market logic. And then a few weeks later, I get this letter from him thanking me for the book. And it's like hearing Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice. Except in Amitabh Bachchan's voice, which frankly is the best Mr. Darcy possible. So I'm fascinated that he could completely switch his persona from that which he was writing to publicly. And then he wrote this letter, which was completely different. He wrote me another letter after this book came out. And I thought that was funny because, first of all, I've now been upgraded to Sunny Singh ji, which is nice. I was like, wow, I'm like properly respected now, as opposed to Dear Miss Singh. And then he'd done something really sweet because he then added this whole thing in Hindi as well, which I thought was quite interesting, the way he then works with a scholar. I think that's a very clever point, because one of the things that we don't have enough work, not just biographies and memoirs, but we don't have enough scholarly work on Indian cinemas, all of the Indian cinemas. So anybody who's a film scholar, wants to be a film scholar, please come and do some work with us anywhere in the world. But part of it is because a lot of our industry doesn't understand what the value of it. So it's very interesting for me to watch someone like Amitabh Bachchan of that generation. He's very astute and knows the value of this scholarly work that is not going to sell huge amounts of copies perhaps, but is important for his thinking and his image. So I'm fascinated by that, and I think that for me is a real insight into his mind.
Yes, you're right, and also you're talking about this scholarly work and writing about popular cinema, because when I was in college, the first few books I read were Nasreen's work, because that was the Guru Dutt book.
Yeah.
And there were some other books, but mostly, by and large, they were about Satyajit Ray or Ritwik Ghatak. Most of the
Yeah.
books, like I'm talking 30 years ago. So that was one of the reasons. When I grew up, I was in my small town in UP. I was watching popular cinema. I was watching Amitabh Bachchan. I was watching reruns of Rajesh Khanna, Dilip Kumar,
Yeah.
and Dev Anand's film. So that was one main reason I wanted to document
Yeah.
the popular cinema as it is, in a way, in a storytelling way, like a film runs. But there are 100 ways to
Yeah.
to document cinema. Nasreen, how important is that documentation before we take questions from the audiences? How important?
It's very, very important, but I will say that to me, the most important people who made cinema, Guru Dutt, Mehboob Khan, Sahir, all these people, there's nothing really there. So you should say that the documentation has really started from the 80s. Even Manmohan Desai, there's one or two interviews, but from the 90s. But there's so much on the net now. There's Facebook, there's Twitter. So you can't really figure out what's there. Now the books today, publishers are very reluctant to publish books because everyone wants to know what Shah Rukh ate this morning. They don't want to know what his overview of his whole career is. So books have become a little redundant for the Indian fan. And they used to read these books, they are no longer doing so. But documentation has to be reliable. It can't be hearsay.
It can't be Google induced.
It can't be. It can't be, because that's too obvious. The other thing is that when I did that Guru Dutt book and the Guru Dutt documentary, I was very lucky. I met 35 people who had worked with Guru Dutt and interviewed for the film and the book, many of them. And what was very interesting was that documentation also depends a little bit on the gap between the event and when you're doing it. So when I started that work, it was 83, and he had died in 64. So you're talking about 20 years. So their memory, sometimes they would say, and Guru Dutt is rather than was, because they were so much aware of his presence. But years later, 50 years later, they will say was. So therefore you have this time. And as everyone who records a history, oral history, knows, it's all subjective. So the only hope you have is that you are recording from the horse's mouth.
They're narrating their memories correctly.
Yeah, because that's even if it's a scripted
and
answer.
I was amazed because when I got down to write Guru Dutt's story, everyone had passed away. And I was amazed to find there was just one little interview of Guru Dutt, just one. So the document, they were not worrying about documentation back then.
No, they won't. Even today, if you were to do a very serious article or book on Karan Johar, for example, you could say he's a school of filmmaking like Manmohan Desai. You will not find a very serious thing unless you go to Karan and start again.
True. With that note, I think we'll take questions, Nasreen. People have questions, I think.
There's a lady over
lots
there
of
also,
questions.
Yasser.
That's good.
Yeah.
Hi. So in the last, I think, several years, there has been a westernization of Hindi cinema, right? A lot more English being spoken, a lot of it filmed outside of India. And I think what I've noticed the most is like the use of hip hop in songs, right? That they're actually very different Bollywood songs, and oftentimes they're rapping even in English. Gully Boy maybe did this more elegantly, but I think a lot of movies don't. So is Bollywood having an identity crisis, or is this just the next evolution of Hindi cinema?
Okay, so I'm assuming that one's for me. Okay, but I mean, I want to go back. I mean, so one of the things that I talk about 50 years of cinema, but actually the book goes all the way back to theater performances in 1850s. So it's a cultural history of India told through movies. Now, one of the things I want to flag up is that we had swing, we had pop, we had disco. So the fact that hip hop's turned up isn't exactly a surprise. It would be a surprise if it didn't show up. That would be the shock. We've had, there's that huge moment where Sharmila Tagore posed in a bikini. That was a transformative moment. So to say, well, now, actresses are wearing chote kapde, little clothes or short clothes. I mean, it's like we've been here before, right? Even things like there are these grand myths, some of which I explode in the book. So this idea that, there is no kissing. Well, yes, but there is a historical reason for it. But on YouTube, there is a wonderful 9-minute segment of Himanshu Rai and Devika Rani and the longest kiss on screen. You can find it. And that is from the 30s. So let's think about when we have these ideas. But also I think one of the things to keep in mind, India, and I'm not just talking about Bombay cinema and Hindi commercial cinema, India makes more films in the world than any other country. We cannot possibly make a statement like, is it having an identity crisis? Because so much is being done. Also, it's a country of 1.4 billion people. Anything I say about India, the opposite is equally true. And I don't think it automatically means that it's an identity crisis. I think that plurality, that constant innovation, that's one of the strengths. And again, that innovation within cinema is extraordinary. So one of the things, I'll give you a little anecdote. When sound was introduced, most European cinema refused to take it on board. The two film industries that ran with it were actually Bombay cinema, India, which is also when it actually splinters the industry into languages, and Hollywood. Those were the two people who, and Indian cinema has adopted all innovation, technology, culture, all kinds of materials so quickly. And part of the reason of that sound, for example, and we're seeing versions of it, is frankly Iranian cinema owes us a huge debt, because the first Farsi language film was not made in Iran, it was made in Bombay. So let's kind of be a little bit more accurate in the ways we think, but also more open-minded, because I think we have to get out of that colonial lens that is constantly in our own heads.
I think Sunny is right, and I would like to add a bit here. With the advent of OTT, I think things have really changed. You can see all web series and movies produced in India are among the top charts all across the world. And with that, out of us three, Nasreen is the only one who is actually a part of the film industry, because most of the big films you're watching on OTT, as well as in theaters across America or everywhere across the world, and the web series is in OTT, are being subtitled by Nasreen. She is a part of all the big films and series being produced in India. And can you tell us something about that experience?
All I can say is I'm very grateful they don't ask me what I think of the film. They don't expect me to be the film critic.
Everybody's got to pay
bills. They
bills.
expect me to do the job competently, and then the director sits
But what's
with
the
me.
thought process? Because they ask you to subtitle this film for
Because,
Western audiences.
It isn't adapting it to the West, but it is a subtitle has to be clear, precise, not go over the cut, look professional, and translate it elegantly. So it's not really about so much the audiences, but about the clarity of view. If you see many, and I would say Hindi films have greatly improved the subtitling, but South Indian films suffer terribly from the subtitling, terribly. So I have worked with Maniratnam on Ponniyin Selvan. I don't speak Tamil, but I had a translator. They would do a rough version, then I would fix it, then he sits with me, and in 7 hours we finish part 1, and 5 hours we finish part 2. So we work very fast. However, it's crucial because all around the world today, people are understanding different cultures through subtitles. How in India, more than even Hindi web series, it's the Korean dramas that are popular. How is that possible? It's all through subtitles. So that's a very important part. I believe there's a lady there who kept putting her hand up.
Yeah.
No,
There's a couple of hands. There was one over there
Let's
as
do
well.
the questions, yeah.
Hi, thank you for this lovely session. And I am like most of us here, or like everyone here, I am a Bollywood buff. So my question is very SRK specific. So if we can, but before I state that question, can we have a big round of applause for the 59-year-old man who just made a great comeback? Yeah.
64. He was born in 64.
64?
Yeah.
So he's 59?
60.
Oh, so, all right, so yeah, we can give him that concession.
Yeah.
He'll be 60 now.
No, he'll be 60 on 2nd November, so he's 59. Yeah. So 59. He is evergreen in that way.
Yeah.
So can we have a round of applause for the 59 or 60-year-old man who has the absolute madness and creative energy that I don't have right now? All right, so my question is, I have noted it down. So in the 1950s and 60s, we had that romantic and patriotic hero coming up. In the 70s with the charm of Amitabh Bachchan and the advent of the angry young man. So then in the 1990s and 2000s, we see the romantic hero and the partial Karan Johar-inspired NRI heroes turning up. But when I see Jawan or Pathan right now, so how would you describe the hero today? Is it a culmination of the previous heroes or a deviation?
For one, he's very confused. And I think he doesn't know sometimes if he's a spy or a gangster or a hero. So he's everything. He's all in one. He's a package now. He's an international package. And if you see Pathan, which I did subtitle, and Jawan is very different. And you see he gives a little lecture about elections and voting. That was very interesting. But otherwise, the film was quite chaotic. It's quite chaotic. You cannot define these people anymore. It's all in transition. Everything is moving very fast. And the audiences in India and everywhere around the world, they judge a film within a week.
Yeah.
The shelf life of these films is virtually zero. By next year, if you said to somebody, you must watch Pathan, they'll say, oh, that's too old. So really, they give no shelf life to these films anymore. And now when I think, and I say, oh, and that old film, Dilip Kumar, Devdas, they say, Sholay for them is old.
Yeah.
Three Idiots is old.
Three Idiots is
so there is no such thing as fixed things. Stereotypes need time. Stereotypes mean that over 10 films you have the same characteristics. But if Pathan does well, then Jawan is the opposite, then Tiger didn't do so well. So you don't know what is going to stick. And stereotypes need time to stick. So that's why there's confusion. There's confusion about the heroines. The heroines can be much more kind of out there, bold and whatever. But by the end of the film, are they still very bold? Did anyone see Crew? A film called Crew. Now that's an interesting film because it was very different representation of women. But how many films are going to be like Crew? Did anyone see Mr. and Mrs. Mahi? Not yet. But you will see in that, again, a very strong woman. But what does she stay strong on her own terms? So it's very confusing. Yasser brought up the question of web series. And web series have basically divided the audience. Not just because of content, but because of financial. A cinema ticket is at least in a PVR 200 rupees or 300. A family of 4 going is 800 rupees. A thing of popcorn is 350 rupees. So an outing is 2,000, 3,000 rupees.
So you're not going to watch smaller films at all?
You can't afford
do
it.
that.
You can't afford it. And you think to yourself, I've given 600 rupees a month, let me wait for Amazon to show it to me. And it's the same thing here. The NRI audience that Karan used to supposedly make films for is over. They are not going to the cinema in England.
That's true.
So in India,
I experienced that during
yeah,
Pathan.
You saw.
No,
Because
and
it
it's a
doesn't.
huge. I mean,
It's huge
I've
loss
seen
of earnings.
the change because even 20 years ago, I used to go to the Odeon and Marble Arch, and it was mostly an audience that was a mixed bag of South Asian and West Asian, and everybody was there, and it would be packed, and their big theater was always packed for a Hindi movie. Now, you're unlikely to see it, and that is only the big releases. You're unlikely to see the small ones because you're going to wait, right? And that's a shame because I think we've got to figure out a different financial model.
True.
Like the Lapata Ladies. Who's seen Lapata
Yeah,
Ladies? Lapata Ladies and 12 Fail were small films and they did very well. They were
Really
called
well in theaters.
sleeper
Theatres,
hits.
yeah.
They were
Yeah.
sleeper
They were
hits.
sleeper
They did
hits.
better than some of the big ones.
But I think they follow the tradition of Basu Chatterjee and Rishikesh Mukherjee kind of
They-
cinema, which is actually missing.
I wouldn't say in cinematic style,
No,
but
no,
in terms of
the
reaching a
stories,
certain audience.
Yeah.
I know there's a lady over there who's had her hand up for a while.
Thank you so much. This was an excellent conversation. My question is on, I'm an avid fan of all Indian cinema, South Indian, Hindi language, most of them. And some of my friends who are not big fans of Bollywood or mainstream Tamil cinema, which is where I'm from, tend to have this sort of intellectual superiority when they want to tell me they can appreciate a film that won at Cannes, but they cannot possibly sit through a Jawan. They cannot possibly sit through a Pathan. I personally don't enjoy that because I love both of it. I love watching All Light as We Imagine at the Cannes. I also love watching Jawan and Pathan. And like you said earlier, why do we care so much about Cannes? Like, why do we care if the Cannes audience can appreciate all of Payal Kapadia's film? My question is there an ability for the mainstream Indian audience to appreciate that same film? And is it possible for the Indian intellectually slightly condescending folk who think they can appreciate that but will not watch Masala? How do you address that? Because I get very offended when people ask me that and I don't have an answer.
So this book is
this book is about that.
basically about that.
I love the book. I just finished reading it this morning.
Thank you. So it's really funny because it started with I went to in the 80s and I was in university in the US, and I remember one of my professors saying something along the lines of, yes, that song and dance stuff you guys do, that's not proper cinema. And I remember just kind of going and actually changed my major. So I was like, I'm not dealing with this. And I find it quite strange because I watch Hollywood, I watch Italian neorealism, I watch Korean, I watch Turkish. I find the cinema as a whole, as a medium, interesting. I don't have the same superiority complex when I compare, let's say, a Turkish series with an Indian one. I can enjoy both of them at the same time. So in my view, this is very historically rooted. And it is rooted in the imperial framework, which decides that certain kinds of cinema, certain kinds of art, certain kinds of literature are good literature. And then there's the other people who do all this weird stuff, right? And I think it's a loss for those people rather than for us, because for me, and I think I love OTT because it just has opened up the world even more. How do we address it? Look, when I lived in Barcelona, I was working on my PhD. I got so tired, I started a film club. So we would basically screen films so we could talk, and people would turn up. Film buffs turned up, and it was only Hindi cinema, and they would come and watch it, and I would curate it, I would talk about what it was, and then we would stay on for a Q&A after to discuss it. It's a shame that you have to do it, but I still think, to me, that's part of my decolonization praxis, because I have to get this point across. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be able to appreciate. I appreciate all kinds of cinema, so no reason why. If some kid from Eastern UP and Bihar, like me, can do it, I think everybody can.
Yes.
I would say my feeling is you shouldn't feel apologetic at all.
yeah.
There's all kinds of food in the world. There's all kinds of cinemas in the world.
And like Karan Johar had said, na, ek tarfa pyar ki jo taakat hoti hai. You don't need.
You can't persuade someone. It is often to do with your upbringing. If at home my parents loved Hindi film songs, so we listened to Hindi film songs, and so whenever there was an opportunity of hearing more or seeing more, we saw it, and we didn't have that same feeling about Tamil cinema. So it is each one really depends on their upbringing, and you can't persuade someone who doesn't like something. I think it's a losing battle. It's better to take them out for a drink.
Take them out for a drink. I'll tell you a good Bollywood themed bar. Take him there.
So following on from her question actually, so we were talking about the Cannes and the Oscars validating our films, right? So why can't we do the reverse and actually have film awards in India where we are judging foreign movies and we are saying, oh, the best French movie goes to, or the best German movie goes to. So we are actually applauding their movies. So we are actually taking the power back to ourselves.
It's a very good idea, but the audience in India has to like Irani films in mass. They have to like Chinese films.
And
they will like
stars,
Turkish films.
even stars
they
and
will
filmmakers.
not even go to those films. They don't even get released. You have Hollywood films. The biggest hit of a Hollywood film was Jurassic Park. And so therefore, I mean, we have to be realistic about what the Indian audience like. So how can you introduce awards for 200 people who go abroad and watch Hollywood?
Well, why bother?
You don't need to.
So I just want. I mean, it's a fun idea. It's a great thought experiment. I love that. But I also want to say, why bother?
Yeah,
why do we constantly have to center the West? Why do we care? And you know, even when we're sort of going, oh, let's have an award and we'll talk about them, we'll judge them. Why?
But as an experiment, it's good to see what the impact would be. I mean, if our newspapers flag.
But the audience has to like the film.
I think as a hypothesis, it's a great idea. I think you can discuss. You are the closest
Yeah, no, but
to
I would
those
say
filmmakers.
the audience in India has to like those films.
Also-
you can't start imposing a film award when the audience will say, my God, who's going to sit
And not
through
just
this?
audience. I have a small story in the stream. This is I wrote like I told you, my first book was a Rajesh Khanna biography. 10 years before that, you know, this is a story, and I had no clue that I'm going to write his story sometime in my life. He was not even an MP then, because for very small, there was a political leaning, but he wasn't an MP, Rajesh Khanna. And I was a young reporter, a cub reporter, sent to take his bite because he was cutting some fita of a hospital somewhere in Delhi. He was going to inaugurate a hospital. So I was there, and I waited for like 3 hours, 4 hours, and Khanna sahab aayenge. I said, what is even happening? And someone who is not even a fan. So finally, he did everything. He cut that ribbon, and then he said, I have to catch a flight. I said, sir, this is for TV, and I just need, you know, a 20 seconds, a 30 seconds sound bite. He said, no, I have to catch a flight. And I'm after him, no, sir, please, you know, sir, my boss has asked me, and it's been 4 hours, blah, 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 blah. And then I got angry, and I told him, sir, I will not let you go. You have to give me a sound bite. So he looked at me, and he said, what's your age? I said, I am 24. So he said, a very, you know, it connects to your thing also, that the mindset. He said, जब तुम पैदा भी नहीं हुए थे, तब मैं superstar बन चुका था. And he said that, and he left.
Yeah. For those who didn't understand, he said, I was a superstar before you were born. One other question is, there's a documentary on the BBC that they made, I think in the 80s, and it was a 1-hour documentary, and 40 minutes of it was the crew waiting for Rajesh Khanna to show up. And it's called Rajesh Khanna's Superstar.
Waiting for Rajesh Khanna.
It's a rare place. You can see it on YouTube.
Yeah. Questioner.
Hi. You mentioned colonialism, or the colonial lens, and how you might want to decolonize Bollywood. I was just wondering how the image of the Indian Muslim woman always being portrayed as, you know, as a concubine, as like prostitution and things like that. I've grown up in this country, I'm third generation, and the only information I can get from Bollywood cinema about my own heritage is through this kind of constant portrayal of Indian Muslim women as very glamorous, very big, with Meena Kumari in Pakiza, in Umrao Jan, and all those films. And I was just wondering how we could overcome this stereotyping. And also, I don't really get why it's so great to have a 9-minute kiss on screen in Indian cinema if you don't actually, do that in public in your normal cultural practice. Thank you.
I missed the last part, sorry?
If you don't do a 9-minute long kiss in public, or even a second, why would it be a good thing to have it on screen?
Yeah, that's what she said.
Well, sounds like a good plan. Well, I have to say, I mean, if you think that is not done in public, do not go to a Delhi club. Just do not go to a Delhi club. It's that nightclub scene is quite shocking. But I think that your question is a very important one, and I know we're wrapping up, so it would require a long period of time. But I just want to raise a point about one film that I speak about in this book, and that is Razia Sultan. Now, Razia Sultan is a terrible movie in many ways. It's also a deeply problematic movie in many ways. But I think it also has one of the most extraordinary combinations of both an actress who is Muslim, Parveen Babi, or at least of Muslim descent, and representation. For me, the first queer representation I saw as a 12-year-old preteen on screen was Razia Sultan. And it's an extraordinary song which constantly gets cut out, with Hema Malini and Parveen Babi. Hema, of course, playing the Empress of India. And I think, so I would always go back, when we talk of a film industry that has produced about 80,000 feature films over 110 years, anything that I say to you, the opposite is also going to be accurate, because there's an enormous work, and enormous amounts of cinema which have represented a very vast range of Muslim women. Having said that, I do think there's a problem, and that problem has increased. There has been definitely in the last 10 to 15 years, even I would date it further back, where we do have a serious radicalization or a radical view and a majoritarian view in filmmaking, which is deeply disturbing and extremely harmful to the ways not just Muslim women, but Muslims in general in India and abroad have been represented. So I'm happy to continue, but that conversation,
and
but you are absolutely right.
Our time is up, and there have been great audiences, and you, of course, Sunny. Thank you so much, Sunny, and thank you, Nasreen. And remain emotionally invested in Bollywood, and keep watching Hindi cinema and Indian cinema.